Welcome everyone, and we're back for another session of Productivity Power Hour. And I'm excited because we're going back to the roots a little bit as far as this particular episode is going to be all about Obsidian themed things. In particular, there's been a lot of questions lately about different sort of Obsidian workflows that I've either shown about or problems that people have run into. So I figured let's go and take that time to answer those questions, but then also importantly, if we have the time, one of the things that's been bothering me about my own personal workflow is how to manage books basically. And so we've talked to this a little bit in the past regarding like read-wise and that kind of thing, but like I still haven't found a process that really sticks with sort of like it's not really working for me just yet. So I want to do some sort of like live coding note processing workflow to figure out what it's like, and then share my thoughts basically during it, so in case it helps other people figure out how they want to process their own books. So with that said, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in, shall we? All right, so if this is your first time joining the stream, so we're here to talk about Obsidian, which essentially, as you can see here, you can find at obsidian.md. Basically, note-taking tool that allows you to control your data locally. More importantly, it's got a lovely community behind it, and a big fan. So if you want to check that out, that's basically what we're talking about. But let's go ahead and dive into the very first question. So we'll do the FAQ portion of the stream first. And so here we go. So this question here is actually from Josh, who's here in the chat. And so here's the scenario that's basically being presented here. So let me actually go ahead and hide some stuff so it's easier to read. So the concept here is that let's envision that, so he's saying that, watch the video for a Git complete course and then taking notes inside of Obsidian, right? As far as what's going on. So this makes sense, right? Because if you're learning certain commands, this is how you're probably going to take notes. You're going to take it in a single note. However, whenever I want to delete the branch in Git, instead of referring to the notes, I'll just actually Google how to delete the branch in Git. So in other words, relying on Google to answer the question rather than notes, even though you took the time to take the notes. And so some of the topics that I took notes but never used so far, for example, include like cherry pick. All right. So this is a great scenario. So the question here, like when I read this and I thought about this, really the way I'm kind of abstracting this is like, how are you really supposed to improve your notes so that you can basically build that trust towards what is essentially your personalized search engine? Because what we have here is that we've taken notes on how to do things in Git. But then on the other hand, when we're going to go ahead and use the notes, it becomes kind of tricky because, well, it's not broken up in a way that really makes sense for Obsidian to do so. So let's go ahead and just recreate this really quick. So let's call this like Git course notes. I'm going to keep this pretty generic. And we'll have like, let's give like a couple of headings, right? We'll talk about like checking out a branch, right? And we'll keep this real simple. So this is Git checkout branch, and then I'll be like branch, or I'll be like branch name, right? So that's like the variable. I think variables in Bash are prefixed with the dollar symbol. Oh no! Okay. Oh, bummer that. Dude, man, thanks for the call out. Okay, I thought this is okay. Nonetheless, okay. Here we go. Woo. Okay. I'm glad we caught that now rather than later. So we've created a brand new note called Git course notes. And as you can see here, we have checking out your branch, and let's just add a couple more. Let's call like deleting a branch. So that's something so that I do know this will be just Git branch D and then your branch name. And then finally, let's give the other example, right? Cherry picking a branch, or cherry pick a commit for that matter. Okay, so you've learned about cherry pick, and then this is like commit hash, right? So these are your basic things that you've learned. The problem is that when we close this and later we're going to look for things, when we're looking for things in our engine, like search engine, we're not going to be Googling those directly, because if we're like, oh, cherry pick doesn't come up anywhere, but we've taken notes on it. So part of what I found with really curating your notes is about basically taking the time to, one, start to process information in a way that makes the most sense to you. So rather, like, yes, is Google the fastest thing that you can, like, if you want looking for how to delete a branch right now, the fastest thing is 100% go to Google and then just type it in and then click on a couple links, and then eventually you'll probably find the Stack Overflow that has the right command, and then you'll figure it out. That's like what, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, probably how long that would take. But what I would basically recommend, and it takes a little bit of a shift in a workflow process because, again, the quickest thing is like solve the problem and move on. But if we're thinking about improving micro efficiencies in our system to basically get those big benefits over time of how we're working with our notes, then the key thing for here is like, first of all, is to go, I know I took notes on this. So it was in this Git course, right? So that's what I would start. I'll go, okay, Git course notes. But I know that I clearly had a question about deleting a branch. And this is where this technique here is key next. Is that what I do is actually, I'm going to take this piece that I've selected because I know this really actually belongs in its own note. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my workflow first and I'll explain it real quick. I hit Command-Shift-R. And what that does is it basically refactors the note into its own note. So interesting. So let me just replace the templates in the current file. Oh, it really didn't like that. Okay, I'll need to figure out what's going on here. Okay, so deleting a branch. There you go. Let's ignore that. And for whatever reason, oh, the front matter. Oh, this is old. That's why. Okay, I need to insert. I'll need to update that in a second. But what you'll see here is that I've gone ahead and I've refactored the note to deleting a branch, right? And then what I can do here is by simply adding an exclamation point in front of it, now this same note is embedded within the Git course notes. But then we can take one step farther, right? Because deleting a branch might be, well, that's not exactly as descriptive as you want. And this is why I'm like, aliases are the game changer, I think, when it comes to notes. And that is to come in here and to go how to delete a branch with Git. And just by doing this, right, because deleting a branch might be how you want, or maybe you can just call it with Git if you want to be more specific. But then the beauty of this is now when you close the note and you've taken the time to do this, the future, you're like, oh, delete branch Git. Oh, yeah, it's here. And then the reason I like this is because this is what's going to ultimately allow you to build on this. Because now you can be like, you can make notes like, ooh, so here, let's make a note that the -d flag will delete a branch even if changes have not been pushed up to the remote like origin, for example. And what's cool about this is you can basically start to tail your knowledge over time and acquire the knowledge that's most applicable to you. And then what's really great about this too is that over time you can be like, you know what, I'm gonna add like, I'm gonna say related to like Git, right? Or just, I think Git is actually supposed to be low. I'm gonna leave it uppercase. And what's cool now is that later on, if you're like, oh, I would like to write a blog post of all the stuff regarding Git, we could open the Git page and we can actually just look at all the things that's been mentioned. Oh, here's deleting a branch, etc., etc. And so, okay, so that's basically like my workflow when it comes to working through the notes and making them more useful, because eventually, this is also why, for example, I try to recommend naming your notes like how you would Google something, because the more you do that, the more that your notes really do become a personalized search engine. So Josh here with the question, is there any way to pull all of the headings and add it under the alias? So all subheadings in the notes. So you're saying to like, okay, so what I'm hearing here is that if we're talking about Git notes, you're saying to pull this stuff out inside of alias. So if you were like how to delete a branch, and then you can be like checking out a branch, like you kind of want it to just pull that in automatically as an alias. You know, I don't think there's a way to do that programmatically, but that is an interesting idea though, as far as like all subheadings or something that's like almost like basically queryable. The reason why, I guess one of the reasons I might not be inclined to do it this way is because what I think is important over time is that it's for people to get in the habit of when you're taking your notes, right? I always recommend just take your notes naturally. So in other words, don't be so focused as you're taking notes and like listening to a course or writing, like don't be so focused on refactoring all these notes into individual notes. So for example, checking out a branch here, right? For here, this is the command I was using, by the way, it's Note Refactor. And Note Refactor is a plugin that I'll go ahead and actually make sure to drop as a resource. So Note Refactor plugin. So the Note Refactor plugin is what basically allows you to take the selection that you have. So here, extract selection to new note, first line as file name, right? And so it'll move it out into its own name. Now, granted, the template is super broken right now for me. So actually, you know, let's go and fix that together. So here, you see that there's Note Refactor inside of my settings. So the thing is that the templates here is not as great because ultimately what you have here is, well, you have, yeah, it looks like it doesn't like the template or stuff. I think this is why this is not working. It's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop that here. And then front matter, I think I just call it front matter template now. I think that's what I've called it. So let's see if this works instead. Let me just make sure front matter template is correct. Yeah, it is correct. Okay. So now if, let's see, that's in here. So there we go. We have that. This is wrong. Front matter template. Okay, if this works now, we should be able to replace current file. There you go. Now our front matter appears. Great. Okay. So there was a second part to that question, actually, though. Trusting your search engine. Right. Okay. So now we've talked about how to personalize the thing. So let's see, Dudeman here. This has inspired me to split my notes again. I feel like I've oversplit in the past. You know, that's exactly it. When it comes to splitting notes inside of Obsidian, it really is an art more than a science. And more importantly, you'll notice that what I'm trying to recommend here when you're splitting your notes is to split notes with intention. So for all the developers here in the chat or coders, it's essentially like if you try to split too early, you end up in a pre-optimization phase. When I do think that this is why I'm saying, like, let the friction of like, oh, I needed this thing, let me go create it. The more you do that, I think the more you start to tune your brain towards how you probably like to split things rather than splitting things for the sake of splitting it. And so, you know, similarly, right, the cherry picking, I honestly would probably leave this alone until like I had a time where I was trying to learn more about cherry picking. And this is where I would then spend the time to refactor this into its own note and then take notes on cherry pick or how it can be used effectively, right? And so rather than using things like, so a friend of mine always sort of refers to information as like just in case information versus just in time. And so I think those are really great concepts because the just in case mentality is like this sort of hoarding mentality we tend to have when it comes to information, I find. It's one of the reasons we tend to have a lot of Chrome tabs because we are holding on to things just in case. And while this is overall, it like, people clearly have found ways to work around that, right? As far as like hoarding things. But I think a lot of us do feel the pain of like that stuff not really becoming applicable or useful. And so if we're talking about productivity from the sense of creating impact that's meaningful to us, then it matters that like we don't hoard information for the sake of hoarding it. That we trust that when we take a note in Obsidian, it's going to be there for us. Now, it might not be the most accessible in that moment, but if we optimize every piece of information for searching, like your job is basically going to be like a glorified like search engine like refactoring. When I think there is an art, like there is beauty in having some things just stay locally to a note and then having it break out when it makes more sense. I think it actually strengthens those neural connections as well in terms of a learning bit, because by spending the time to go look for that information and figure out how you phrased it, you're basically codifying that bond as far as like how the information is being connected through like basically your neural pathways. And then more importantly, spending the time to refactor it, add more context. Think about it. That's just even better ways for you to actually like commit those things basically to memory. And rather than a Google just basically says, oh, I'm just going to quickly look for the thing. And then it's like, it's more like a rote process that's more robotic. And do you actually spend the time to learn it, to engage on it? Not quite as much, because you're kind of getting in, getting out. And I think this is the advantage of taking the notes at this level, so that over time you can be like, well, you know, cherry pick wasn't the best option for this reason, right? Or it was related to this. And this is how we build in our experience over time. So now that we have this, what we're going to do now is, let's see. So some of the topics I took never used so far. Again, never using your notes at the time is totally fine. And this is why I'm saying don't refactor it, right? Because until you need it, then you can pull it out. But that also means don't worry about only taking notes you're going to use. It's just like I said, it's a weird balance between the two, but trust your gut and know that you'll grow and become better attuned to how you want to move through information over time. So hopefully that helps to answer your question, Josh. All right, so let's talk about question number 2, which is also from Josh here. And the scenario here is a lot of times when we're learning things, right, and we're reading, particularly like, let's say books are a great example of this, but I think video courses share the same problem. Is, let's say in this particular scenario, there is a book for the intro to Python. And so you take notes for the individual chapters. I've definitely done this before. And so later on, you're going to read a different book about JavaScript, and then you're taking notes again. And guess what? There's an intro chapter. Well, so Josh in this case is saying that, so I talk about my approach as far as remapping new notes so that it always basically searches existing one. But then as a result, you end up getting some naming conflicts as a result. And so how do you go ahead and manage this essentially? So the way I'm phrasing this question in my mind is how we deal with repetitive learning note titles, right? Especially when we're in the process of learning. And so the way I've been handling it actually is to go ahead and create, when I do an introduction note, so let's say we have introduction to Python. In fact, I wonder if, okay, so let's say this is the book Introduction to Python, right? This is a book, and then there are different chapters that we're going to take notes on, right? So you would think that you're going to probably do an intro chapter. So let's scaffold this up a bit. So then here, this is your introduction chapter. But oh, look, wait a second. There's already an introduction chapter, right? And so if we look at the introduction chapter here, we'll notice that, interesting, what is this related to? So this is related to Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaraski. So this is actually already a great example of showing that I had already taken notes on a different chapter. In fact, this is a chapter of a book. So I'm going to say book chapter is actually the type of note this is. And so what I actually would probably be inclined to do, to be honest, is rather than calling it this, what I do is I just basically add a parentheses to the notes. Because one of the, I would say, downsides of Obsidian is that the file names you're basically limited to file names having certain characters, but more importantly, they have to be unique. And so because they have to be unique, this means that when I'm creating the original note, I tend to try to add more metadata. That's why you'll see a lot of my things regarding templates and stuff. I put parentheses templates. And so in this case, I might do intro to Python just like this. And then so if you're wondering Ben, but this is that means all of my chapters have a parentheses. That's how it could start. But you can go ahead and just make sure the alias is this introduction, and that's fine. So that way going forward, as far as printing out the alias, you can see I can swap that in. Then it can still say introduction. And more importantly now, when you're looking up introduction, you'll see there's actually multiple contexts now, right? It's saying, oh, this introduction is introduction to Python, whereas this one is, within this context. So to be honest, I don't like the fact that introduction here is so generic, because if you think about it another way, when you think about backlinking, this means that every single word that says introduction is somehow Obsidian is trying to help you in being oh, it might be related. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. Right, this introduction is actually very specific to this book called Make Time by Jake Knapp, and I'm just gonna be really long with my file name because specificity ultimately I think helps in the long run. So that's that here, and then what I can do if I add my front matter here and then I just add here to my introduction, now I have a really rich way of looking at introduction. Right, so you can see here introduction by, and then the cool thing about aliases too is that because it shows you the original file name, that extra time you spend to basically add metadata to the file name makes it really easy to sort through things. And so here I see from Dragon Dust here that they group the file names by topic. So Python introduction. So that's another, so it's a flip on the concept, right? So rather than making introduction intro to Python, it would be Python introduction. And so whichever way your brain prefers, I think is basically the key. And this is, the naming thing here is also slightly a bit of a conflict because some of you may be thinking okay, well, I know how to solve this. I'll just put it in a folder, right? So for example, we could say, for instance, inside of this folder, we could go inside of the note folder and I could create a Python folder. And inside of the Python folder, I can create an introduction file. So let's create an introduction file. I could do this, right? And then what you get here is when you're opening up your introduction, now you have it in the path name. The reason how do I say this? The reason I try to avoid recommending folders as a way of organization is because it's one of the things that inadvertently becomes constricting over time, because it is basically a fixed model for creating relationships, and it's kind of a top-down hierarchy. Whereas again, if you're now reading an introduction book on computer science or then computer programming, are you forced to then create all these different folders to manage your notes? And then what happens when you want to link with them kind of differently? Refactoring becomes kind of a pain. And so I am trying to help people when it comes to note taking get to the most value as quickly as possible. And the most value you get in notes, in my opinion, is not in the folder structure, because that's actually very difficult to explore, if you ask me honestly. Because when you want to compare folders side by side, like, you're basically stuck with the traditional explorer view, right? But if you can actually instead compare things, like if you spend time to enrich your notes in a way that's like, okay, this introduction, right? We talked about this, which, see, here's the thing. I don't even know what introduction this is, right? The only reason I had context into it is because of the path name. But if I want introduction, the Python, right, the one in the folder, there's nothing in here. And that's why I think folders ultimately lack, like, notes do not carry their folder path with them over time. So if for whatever reason one day, like, your folder, like, you needed to move things around, let's say you decided to move all your programming notes from Python into, like, I don't know, like, you could do like, there's like a Django, like Django has like, you see what I'm saying? Like, it becomes tricky to figure out where everything belongs. And you spend more time on that rather than if you just created this note, right? So let's go ahead and, so instead this Python one, right? Let me move this back to the Zettelkasten, the root folder. So let me see, empty. That should be empty now. Great. Okay. So now that I have this in here, what I can do then instead is, again, not only can I do similar to what Dragon does said, I can say Python introduction, which is fine, but more importantly, I can be like, this is where I learned about Python, and then I could just be like, I'm gonna say Python programming language, because in my mind, like, I probably am eventually gonna have, or actually no, the odds I'm gonna have a note for Python the snake is actually super low, so I'm not even gonna worry about this. So this is where, for example, while metadata might be helpful, this is where I know my brain and I know the stuff I'm interested in. Unlikely that I'll be talking about Python the snake. If that becomes a problem, I probably create a note called Python parentheses snake, because Python to me is more likely to, in my world, refer to programming. So again, this is about tailoring it to your brain. And so the beautiful thing about this now is that now we have this introduction to Python. If I wanted to relate it also to, computer programming, then that's fine. I can do that, right? I can do that all within the note. And more importantly, regardless of where the note moves to, or if in the future it gets, like, things get stripped out for whatever reason, like, the note itself contains all the context you need to basically make sense of that. Whereas, like, let's think about how many times where if you're in an organization and someone moves stuff around accidentally, you're like, wait, now all the relationships are gone because we were relying on this really rigid hierarchy. And that is my problem with folders ultimately. Okay, so to get back to this regarding repetitive note titles, that's basically the recommendation here, is to keep your note titles as specific as possible. And whenever you can, try to include some metadata in the actual file name, and then utilize the aliases once again to really leverage that ability to search in a way that makes the most sense to your brain. Okay, so here we go. The question does continue though. And so let's say you want to add more context or create new notes. In this case, you're adding notes to existing one. Won't it create? Okay. So the summation on this, the question here is like, if you keep adding on to this note, right? So let's go back to the get course note that we were talking about. Over time, this thing is going to become gigantic if you're adding every single thing you learn about Git into it. I'd agree. And so, for instance, I might not even actually embed everything. Embedding is only for the convenience of, like, if you really want to refer to it quickly. But in this case, I really might just say, like, I might refactor this, be like commands I know. And then these are the ones I know. And then I might, let's say I've never used cherry pick for now. I might be like commands I learned about, but I don't like commands. Sorry, the title case was looking weird. Commands I learned about, but haven't really used. And then just like that, I have the ability to, like, group things, right? Your Git course notes doesn't become super long. But more importantly, don't forget that you always have the ability to collapse stuff within Obsidian. So even though it's not like a traditional toggle element that you would expect in, like, a Notion doc, for example, that it's, like, hard-coded in, Obsidian does have built-in collapsing for subtext as well as, like, headings and that kind of stuff, which is super nice because that basically means that it's easy to sort through to be like, oh, yeah, this is ones I don't really know versus things that I know really well. And so this is where the refactoring your notes comes into play, because as you're taking notes and the notes grows, you want to organize things in a way that's most useful to how you're solving problems. If you're taking notes on instructions, would you copy, paste the instructions, or simply add link to the documentation? Ooh, this is a very classic debate as far as, like, so the debate here actually conceptually is about if you simply copy in instructions from, basically if you copy and paste something in, how valuable is that as a note? And there's a lot of discussion within the note-taking community about this. And where I think I lean a little bit more into is that copying pasting is fine for referential things, but typically that doesn't engage in the same way as you like actually writing the note. And so, most people from like a purist note-taking perspective would say you should really paraphrase everything and put it into your own words. But that's from a purist perspective, right? Practicality dictates a lot of times that sometimes we just need to quickly copy and paste something and then add some notes to it. And so for me, the difference between adding link to a documentation versus copying it directly is if for whatever reason, I'm not sure I can trust the source to keep it online. So if it's something as simple, like if we're talking about things like the instructions on how to write, like build your own app, for example, and it's like a whole course, that's not something I would necessarily copy into my Obsidian, because once I've gone through the process and learned from it, the important process is like the things that I want to take notes on. It's not the exact steps that I took, because I can do that at a high level, right? So if we're building a counter app, right? So it's like a counter app course. Like there's nothing stopping me from like, oh, like the instructions here. So let's use a clipboard icon for that. So the instructions were like, clone repo, install dependencies, right? You could like take notes over time and be like, oops, like I need to use yarn and not npm, right? Like you could do little notes like that. And that's helpful if you're trying to make sure you get a high level overview. But would I copy the README into here just to check everything? No, I wouldn't, right? In fact, if we're talking about GitHub repos, I would just, if you're really that concerned, I would create a fork of it. But the key thing is that when you're copying and pasting, like if there's a specific snippet, right, that you want to quote that you found really impactful, then you want to basically preserve the original way it was written and then give credit to whoever wrote it. That I think is a great example for a use case for copy and paste. But otherwise, I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time doing copy and pasting from official documentation, because the greatest value you'll get from the greatest value you're going to get from doing that exercise is ultimately just taking the notes yourself. So why did you find this important, and what about it is important to you? If you write that in to like your notes for like the counter app course, or like if you're looking at the view docs and you're like, oh, this specific thing really stuck out to me, taking the time to write that down will mean a heck of a lot more than you copy and pasting it. Because then most importantly, as you start to, it's similar to the Git course note that we've been talking about this whole time, right? There's a reason why we didn't just document every single command that Git has. What we did was we learned the fundamentals, and we found that checking out a branch was useful for us. Deleting a branch was useful for us. Cherry picking a commit was cool, but like maybe I'll use it later. But then that's like it. We didn't spend the time to learn about like, how do you automatically reassign the author when you accidentally committed it under the wrong email. And that's because, don't ask me how I know, because I may have done that on multiple occasions. And so that's like a whole thing where like when you have that problem, you can deal with it, but there's no reason to take notes on everything in the world. And so let's see. Cool. I have a question here. So I'm going to say it's I'm going to pronounce it as Viru. And so the question here is, could you please share a list of plugins that you use at some point? Yeah, so actually, I'm going to go ahead and just drop this in the chat right now. So the boilerplate I have basically contains all of my favorite plugins. So I'll make sure to drop that inside of the notes for the show notes and for those watching the recording later. So I'll go ahead and drop that in. But as far as the sliding goes, it basically is, at least as far as, if I think it's what you're talking about, overlapping note transition effect. This is the Andy Matuszak plugin. So actually, I'm just going to actually write a note for that too. Andy Matuszak plugin. And since y'all are here live, you're going to get the benefit of getting that information right now. So let me just, Andy Matuszak, sliding panes. So I can go ahead and, let's see, how do I do this? Options. No, where's the original docs? Here we go. And then copy share link. Perfect. Boom. Oh, that wasn't what I don't think that's going to work, but it's okay. I can copy the official GitHub repo. So big shout out to the author for making this plugin, because it's definitely my favorite way to browse my notes. So boom. All right. So thank you for the question. Yeah. All right. And all right, so let's keep it going. Oh, Charlie, I just saw your question here. I don't know how I missed this. Could a template or JS snippet find all H2s and add them to the alias? Yeah, basically. The lovely thing about Obsidian is that it's all JavaScript underneath, and there's a lot of programming you can do to make your life easier. But usually, at least unless there's a plugin for it, I tend not to, I'm very careful to recommend the programming aspect to people because there is a decent learning curve underneath it, especially even if you're looking to like plugins, because then you have to deal with the whole then you have to deal with the whole TypeScript ecosystem, and that is I think a no-go for a lot of people because it's a lot to learn a code base, all the different APIs and things. I would say still aren't quite documented for people who are new. You kind of have to like go through the hazing ritual of just figuring out where things are and hoping you find the right example. So maybe at some point, if my schedule opens up miraculously, I'll be able to create like a whole course regarding like building plugins and that kind of stuff. Because again, I've done some sessions in the past on like building plugins and gotten decently far, but I still wouldn't say I'm comfortable in like how the API works at its core, and a lot of the common things that I'm trying to do just haven't quite answered those. So but as far as possibility goes, yes, it is. It should very well be possible to scan a note and have templater fetch out the individual things and then populate things as desired. Okay. Yep. Cool. All right. So I think that wraps up the questions, first two questions that we have here from Josh. So once again, big thanks to Josh for asking these questions and submitting them. As you have additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And then this other one here is one that actually I have run into, but I thought I didn't run into it recently until someone said that they ran into it too. So I figure let's do some live coding with this and then figure out what's going on. So the question here is from Cone Bunders. And there is an error that they're getting as far as like the templater parsing error. Destination file already exists. Following the await TP move command from the base template, there are basically two files being created. All right. So what is going on? Let's go ahead and show it off, shall we? Okay. So let's open up my base note. So the question here is speaking specifically to a snippet of code I have here, which is let's focus on the people nodes. Wait, why is this not out of alphabetical order? I'm switching that right now. MNNOP. Great. All right, productivity hour, project flywheel. Great. People nodes. Okay. So you'll notice here that if there's actually this is not even the right place. But I must have ran into it because I thought I was doing this at one point. Okay, so I wanted to put all my people nodes in a people folder. That's basically what I wanted to do at one point. And I have actually a snippet here that should work that way. But so basically, let's test this out right now, right? If I open a John note and create it, we'll notice that John Smith is going to be created at the root level. John Smith right here. It's in the Zettelkasten folder. But what I really wanted to do is to move it inside of the people folder, inside of here. So let's delete John Smith again. And let's go ahead and try to augment this the way I think it should work. And then we'll debug this because I have a feeling I am going to run into the problem that Cone is referring to. Okay, so what I want to do here is that if it starts with the @ symbol, we're going to tp.file.move. Where are we going to move it to? We're going to move it to the Zettelkasten folder under people. And then we will basically append the title. This is going to work. Oh, right. Where's title coming from? You may be wondering. Title is being defined up here. So tp.file.title. I just made it easier to refer to. Okay. So that's that. All right. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and open up at, let's say Kim Johnson. Open it up. All right. So we'll see something funny did happen. So already I noticed my file name is messed up. And then is it in here? Is it in here? J, K, oh wait, no, it would be under P. So it would be after the @ symbol. Nope, I don't see it. People, oh no, it's under people, Kim Johnson. So, Juicy Bit here. Oh yeah, I think Juicy Bit caught the error, at least one of the errors. So, okay, what did I miss? I missed a slash here. Okay, let's try this again. So then we're going to say then we're going to say, let's say Sarah Dwayne, and then open it up. Okay, so Sarah Dwayne was created, and then Sarah Dwayne does not exist inside of Zettelkasten. Sarah Dwayne exists inside of people. Okay, that actually worked as expected. Did it create a conflict? Because again, I've actually seen that error, so that's why I'm not like questioning the validity of it. I've actually seen this before. Okay, it looks like it is currently working as expected. Now, as far as the Q&A goes for this particular one, so people title, yep, from the base template is 2 identical files. So my answer to this one, if you're still running into issues with the await, I guess my big thing would be just make sure that you're on the latest Obsidian version, because I don't think I'm on the insider build right now. About installer version. Oh, 0.12. Okay. So I'm on a slightly ahead version, I think, 0.13.23. But it looks like it might have been fixed. So again, check that your templater plugin is updated and check your Obsidian is updated. And then hopefully that should fix it for you, because it looks like the people notes are moving at least correctly as far as I can tell right now. So hope that helps to answer that question. And if not, I always try to actually give a hack to us, or not a hack. A hack always makes it sound like it's not good. The solution to this, if it doesn't work, to be totally honest, is let's say for whatever reason, like this snippet doesn't work, so we delete this. We cannot rely on templater to await and automate this piece. It's actually not as bad as you think it is. So now, once again, if we open up a Sarah Dwayne, you'll see that Sarah Dwayne, right, is currently inside of Zettelkasten. But moving it is not as painful as you may think. All you have to do is actually Command P, and then just basically there's a move to another file folder. And then after that, you can just move it to people. And so the reason why I say it's actually not that painful is because it's essentially just a bunch of hotkeys. And if you really wanted to start making that even easier, to be honest, I probably would do this for myself. So I'm going to do this right now. So moving to another folder, move to another folder. I actually think would probably work really well as Command-Shift-M, although what am I using? Oh, open monthly note. I don't know if I use the monthly note that often, but this is also what I love about the hotkey interface, by the way. It tells me if I've already used it. What is M being used for right now? Meta edit, run meta edit. I need to rethink this through. But anyways, essentially, you can certainly automate that a little bit more. So you can, this is basically Command-Shift-M for move, people, that's it. So not perfect automation, but I did that for the longest time before I even realized that templater could do it. So a little bit of quality of life improvement, but I wouldn't sweat it too much. Okay, great. All right, that takes care of the 3 sort of big questions that I got as far as Obsidian goes. And so now what I want to do is I want to shift over to something that actually was brought up regarding Obsidian. And actually, not even just Obsidian, just workflows in general. And this was around the idea of processing books. And so just to recap, in case you're jumping in at this point, I've done different sessions regarding like how I integrate with my reading into my notes. And so currently, basically, my workflow for this is I'll read on the Kindle, I'll highlight some stuff, Readwise will get it, and then it'll put it inside of Obsidian. And I've got that automation mostly working, but I'll be totally honest in that, like, even though I got the automation working, I still haven't gotten the process in a way that really feels like it's sticking with me. Like, I'm not necessarily spending the time to look at my notes, or more importantly, I'm not sure how everything's being created. So I thought we'd go ahead and spend the remainder of the time today to sort of looking at what my current infrastructure is and how I'm thinking of improving it, so that as I read books and I'm taking in those notes, that I can actually find ways to reuse them in a way that information is not siloed in a bunch of different places. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that's working right now. So first thing first is I am currently reading a book called Mindset, which is recommended to me by a friend by the name of Jade, who's amazing, by the way, if you ever get a chance to meet her. She's also really good at board games. So if you ever play any board games with her, just watch out. She'll get you. But so Mindset is an amazing book. I've always been a big fan of growth and versus fixed mindset for a long time. And so for those that don't know what that is, basically it's call it a perspective on life, a mindset regarding how you see basically the lens of life. So a fixed mindset is probably what a lot of us are probably familiar with, even though we might not call it that, where you basically, once you've learned that something is, let's say, for example, a lot of people consider intelligent to be a fixed aspect of life. So once you take an IQ test when you're a child and, that's it. You are smart forever or you are dumb forever, right? And this is very fixed mindset because it basically says there's nothing I can do to change it. And so one of the things that I think a lot of us are very familiar with this because growing up in probably traditional schooling, if you go into public education, and I'll speak specifically to America, but I think a lot of other places in the world experience a similar schooling system with this. Like grades are one of those things that I think a lot of times make people feel pretty fixed mindset about things because let's face it, right? If you get an F in your class in algebra, right, when you're in middle school, that F is on your report card forever, right? It doesn't matter if after you failed that class that the next year you figured out how to you're suddenly an algebra whiz, right? You will always have that F on your. And so fixed mindset is a lot of times one of the things that causes us a lot of unhappiness because basically we don't feel like we have a lot of control in our lives. And so growth mindset is, as you can imagine, the opposite of that, in that while failures certainly hurt and they sting, it allows us to basically acknowledge the possibility that things can change, that we can improve them. So we may not be the most talented at something at first, right? It may not be something that we can do immediately, instinctively, but with enough time and enough effort, what we can do is we can increase mastery of things. And the more we can see life this way, a lot of times, is one of the things that really enables people to get through difficult times. And so, I see there's a comment here from Larissa. I'm gonna say Larizette. So I've watched some videos about parenting, even though I don't have kids, and they recommend to praise the action, not the child. So love is unconditional, and we don't associate our esteem to a fixed state. This is fantastic, absolutely, right? And so one of the quotes, in fact, I'm gonna switch to the camera real quick. So one of the things that I kind of want to focus on with the touch on with this is that in the book, she talks about the concept between failure as an action versus failure as a label you assign to yourself. And what Larizette here mentioned, I think it very much encompasses that. Yes, Mindset by Carol Dweck, absolutely. And so a lot of times I think when we think about failing at something, we see that as a label to who we are as an individual. So I am a failure, right? Because I could not get the code to work within the live stream, I am a failure, right? This is very fixed mindset. And it's funny because that same word from a growth mindset perspective would instead be you know what? I failed at being able to get that live coding worked, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spend some time to figure out why it doesn't work later, and I'll do it again on the next live stream, and I'll show how it worked. Right? Growth mindset is the idea that basically your life does not exist as your life exists as a series of snapshots and not as a single data point. But a lot of times fixed mindset assumes that you once that snapshot of your report card is representative of it forever. Think about how many people are you know what? I'm terrible at math. Why do they think they're terrible at math? Well, because in school, they didn't have a teacher that really could connect with them, connect the material with them on that level where they could engage with it. And as a result, they got bad grades. And when they got bad grades, what did that mean? Well, they weren't on the honor roll. And for those who don't know what the honor roll is, it was basically a list of kids who had good grades. So if they weren't on the honor roll for math class, they weren't in the gifted class. So they're not good at math. And then it's funny how from there, you're oh, well, if I'm not good at math, therefore I'm not good at programming. And then it's funny how those small ideas have such large implications for how we make decisions, when the truth of the matter is a lot of times things are contextual. And so another phenomenal study that she talked about was, I can't remember the exact information, but this is why we're going to talk about book processing in a second, because I did highlight this section, is that there was an experiment done where I think they sent out a survey to a bunch of teachers and told them that here is the grade of a student who got a 65% on their, I don't know if it was a specific subject. Let's just say it was a specific subject. Let's say it was math. They got 65% on their math test. What can you tell me about this student? Now, most of you, when you're thinking about this, are probably, hopefully, I'm hoping, you're probably thinking, that's not nearly enough information to say anything about the student. But shockingly, in that experiment, a lot of teachers came back with basically a whole treatment plan of how they would treat that student, because a student that would get a 65% on a test means this, and this. Whereas one of the best responses to that entire study was a teacher who was like, I can't believe that y'all would ask such a ridiculous question. Like, this study is completely invalid, because how can you draw conclusions when so many contextual pieces of information make an impact on what that score means, right? Is the reason the kid got a 65 on the test because they went through something traumatic recently? Is it because they're really sick and they missed the material? Or like, maybe they're just not really good at fractions, but they're really good at like differential equations. Like, there's so many different things, right? And so anyhow, like, to wrap it up, so clearly I found the book to be really engaging from like a lot of the different examples that I think she's a PhD, so I'm gonna say Dr. Dweck brings up in the book. And at the same time though, while I'm really engaged with this now, I'd love for it to exist in my notes somehow, so that in the future when I'm like, oh, there was like an experiment about teachers and something about feedback, like I can actually find it. So with that said, let's see, I'm looking at the chat. Jacob can confirm kiddos do seem to respond much better to this. Yeah, it's funny, like I've been a growth mindset advocate for many, many years. And I'm probably, I figured out this concept, I don't know, probably in my teenage years, not because I was thinking about growth versus fixed mindset, but personally, I was feeling frustrated at the idea that like things couldn't change. Like, when you have a fixed mindset, again, I didn't know it was called that at the time, what you're basically, oh, you know what? Actually, it's related to this psychological concept of external loci of control. Is it loci or loci? I'm going to say loci. No, it's locus, loci. I'm going to say loci. External loci of control versus internal loci of control. And basically what that means from psychology perspective is, are you attributing change to the things around you, or are you attributing change to the things that you can do? And I think Charlie here, loci. Okay, loci it is. So in that case, right, with the growth and fixed mindset, we really have a similar issue where fixed mindset says nothing can be done, and I am born with certain things and nothing can change. Whereas we've seen a lot of some of the most inspirational stories are stories where people you didn't think would have been possible, right? Someone with a fixed mindset would have been like, I'm a goner. But instead, because they were like, no, I'm going to defy I believe I can change my reality, they were able to actually make it a discernible impact in a way that most people didn't think was possible. Now, anyway, so I don't know where I was going with that. But anyhow, that's like my little like call like a personal anecdote about mindset and growth mindset. But again, I think a really important topic, because whether it's for your career or whether for life in general, I think it's important to like, I think Larizat, what you brought up regarding like labeling actions and not people, I think it's huge, because not only is this critical for your own self-growth and development, but whether it's with a partner in a relationship or the people you interact with, it is really important to help people break out of this, because I think it does a lot for a relationship to not, how do I say this? A good friend of mine told me at one point that when it comes to talking with people, one of the key things to understanding them and connecting with them is understanding the stories that they tell about themselves. And so when I say, like, examples of this are like, I'm a good partner, I'm a good father, or I'm a good coder. There are certain stories we tell about ourselves. And the thing is that if we're not careful, sometimes like fixed mindset mentality, like I'm a failure, I'm a bad partner, I'm a bad coder, like these things threaten our stories. And when they threaten our stories, they threaten to undermine our relationships and our ability to move forward. And so the more we can start to see growth mindset, not only for ourselves, but for others, is I think how we can ultimately continue building collaborative like relationships with one another, and to help one another grow, so that when people are hitting hard times, to help remind them that like it is the action that has happened, and more importantly, that action is not a fixed snapshot. It's something that's malleable and that can change. And the more we can do that, I think the world would be a better place if we could start doing that for one another. With that said, I see Charlie here with another recommendation here. Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg. Okay, I'm going to add that to the list of things mentioned. Oh, Dudeman here with a lot of nonviolent communication. Yep, that's a great one. How to talk so kids will listen, and listen so kids will talk. You know what's really funny, though? I know we talked a lot about kids, and some people here have talked about the fact that they're not parents, but they're reading stuff about kids. It's because, honestly, like, the stuff it's funny that when we treat kids with a certain sort of mentality, and then we forget that being an adult is nothing more than it's a result of age. But age does not mean emotional maturity. It does not mean actual maturity. I would say no difference than if you're looking at someone's job resume and they're like, well, I've been a programmer for 10 years. If they haven't done anything interesting, the new programmer who's been in boot camp and then built a bunch of active projects in a year is probably way more effective and like able as a developer than the 10-year programmer. So funny enough, the reason why I'm saying this is because a lot of the stuff that's written for like communicating with kids is actually really useful for communicating with adults. So just something, yeah, see, I see Dudeman here with a similar comment here. Exactly. Don't treat like these sort of kid materials as like, oh, it wouldn't work for adults. You would be surprised. Because ultimately what we're talking about here is about compassion and kindness. And that applies whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult, who you are. Like, honestly, it's good principle to live by. Okay, so let's switch back over to the screen. Boop. Okay, so mindset. Here's the thing. I have the integration set up somewhere. We need to figure out if it's working. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna queue up my Readwise plugin and I'm gonna say sync my data now. So we see here in the bottom here, Readwise is building the export, it's saving files, it's complete. All right, saving files. All right, great. Let's learn a little bit about the Readwise plugin. Again, this is not like a Readwise deep dive. This is merely just a sort of like, let's kind of go through to see where it is. So I initiated the sync. It's living in the Zettelkasten folder, sync every 12 hours, resync deleted files. Great. Okay, sync every time Obsidian opens. Great, this is a good automation workflow. I'm happy with this. Here's the question. Does Mindset by Carol Dweck, is that in here? So that's the question. I see a chat here from Charlie. Can I just say thank you for saying that about your tenure in your career aloud? It's actually something that I felt a lot of pressure about. Yeah, so the Charlie's comment here, this was about what I was saying regarding the fact that like years of experience to me only matter if you've been doing something significant during that time. And so it's why one of the talks that I pretty sure I'll be giving in a couple months is really how do I say this? A lot of my focus and attention on productivity is ultimately not necessarily about being productive for the sake of being productive. Because in that regard, I think that's no similar than the job tenure. It's like just because you held a job title for X number of years does not equate with skill level or your ability to actually be effective at what you're doing, to create impact. Impact is ultimately about engagement and engagement on things that you value and align with your principles. And so the more you can take each step of your career and your life to align with those things, I think when you can create impact like that, that's how we can leave legacies that we're proud of, regardless of whether that's in our work life or in our personal life. So Jacob here. So I talk to kids I talk to any adults. Everything you communicate about may require explanation at some level, and kids may just require a little bit more background. They aren't lesser humans, and similarly, people that aren't developers aren't lesser or require being talked down upon. Absolutely, Jacob. 100 chef's kiss emoji for that one. Absolutely. I see also Chelming here in the chat. There's a difference between 5 years of experience and 1 year of experience 5 years in a row. Yep, that about sums it up. So, I know that jobs can be challenging when it comes to this sort of growth because you don't always get to choose what's assigned to you. And so this is one of the reasons why in the talk I gave a couple weeks ago regarding like tips to build a successful career in dev, it really is about figuring out what you want. And don't get me wrong, this is really challenging. I'll state this for myself as well. Like a lot of us grew up in traditional systems where the paths have been kind of laid out for us, right? School told us what classes to take. We had some choice, like a little bit of variation of like which foreign language did you want to take, or like maybe what gym sport did you want to do instead of another. But I think when it comes to the career, if we allow ourselves to purely be defined by what our companies tell us to do, I think this ultimately does a disservice to the company and us. And I think what's actually a better path is to take the time to figure out what makes you tick, what excites you. Because, for example, if your job is in front-end development and you build stuff, maybe at the moment, no one in your company needs, like, there's no direct request for working with data visualizations and animating things. But if that's something that gets you really excited, investing that in yourself to take, some time to study and learn is incredibly valuable for both sides because one, that gets you motivated, but two, once you have the skills and you've acquired it, it's easier to be like, hey, by the way, I can build a prototype for this work thing, and next thing you know, you're the data visualization person for your company. But the only way that would have worked is if you figured out what made you tick. Whereas like if you keep waiting for people to prescribe what they want you to do, then well, it's a pretty perilous journey. Now some people have very smooth career transitions that way, right? They keep getting great, exciting projects assigned to them, and they have a very exciting career. And to those people, I'm very happy for them, but I think they are the exception and not the rule. So similar to the growth mindset, fixed mindset, when it comes to your career, like having that internal loci of control, and to say that like I'm gonna do something that aligns with myself, I think that allows you to control the reality that you live in, the environment. So as a result, I think the world's more interesting when people are willing to add their own unique splash of color to it. But in order for people to do that, they need to feel empowered to do so. And I think the only way we can build emotionally safe environments for people to do that is to start living those examples out ourselves, so that eventually, as a lot of us mature and grow in our careers, we can serve as role models so that we can create those environments for other people. Because otherwise, we're just going to be stuck in the status quo. And I think a lot of us, probably from experience, could say that the status quo is good, but it could be better, right? Not fixed mindset, growth mindset. Chumming here in the chat. At my last job, 60% of my time was spent working on projects I wouldn't even put on my resume. Building my resume and realizing that a majority of my time was wasted and not contributing to my career was eye-opening. Woof, chumming. I feel that one. Like my tidbit to that actually. Okay, I'm gonna. I'll switch back over to the camera real quick because I realize I'm not using the Obsidian at all. Okay, so my tidbit on this regarding. So I actually had a similar experience with this as well. If you find yourself in a job that you're not particularly excited for the work you're doing, again, because your day-to-day is gonna be fairly rote, kind of boring. What I recommend is basically when you're filling out your resume, the trap not to fall into is to basically don't list the stuff that you didn't care about. And I say that to a degree of like cheekiness from like, yes, you're going to want to write that you built or maintained like a web application that was used by X thousands of users. Like you can write all that stuff, right? You might have been excited about it, but that shows like you were competent at doing your job as far as the basic stuff. But what I mean by like leave off the stuff that you don't want to do is, for example, one of my first jobs in tech was maintaining this legacy CMS. I think it was called like Percussion CMS. And legacy CMSs are great in the sense that like a lot of times they got enterprise adoption. And so there's a lot of need for support on that because unfortunately a lot of companies are resistant to upgrading to the latest and greatest. So you could have job security from the sense that like, oh, I can maintain the legacy thing. But here's the thing though. If you're not excited about the work that you're doing, right? Like it's one thing if I loved Percussion CMS and I'm really excited to like do more work on it, but I'm not. And so at one point I felt like most people when they're job hunting or thinking of their next role, they'll list everything they've ever done because they think that's how they justify their qualifications, to be like, look at all these different technologies I worked. But what I would argue is that when you do that, you're basically inviting this other part of the world to be like, oh, so you do this technology that we support that technology and we want you to do it. And basically at one point I realized I needed to take Percussion CMS off of my list. Now, here's the thing though, if you're like, well, but Ben, I need to show that I have a CMS. What if Percussion CMS was the only CMS I've worked with? Then I would say, well, you've learned CMS, right? You've learned the concepts behind a content management system. And so rather than put Percussion CMS, maybe look for a CMS that you're actually excited for, right? Maybe it's Sanity. Maybe it's Drupal. Maybe it's whatever. But then what I would do is I would spend like a week, do like a crash course, play around with it, because again, our value, and this is not even just for tech, as employees, is about the ideas that we learn about, not the tools that we invest in. And I can't state this enough when it comes to, particularly in tech with like tooling and frameworks and stuff, people have this weird loyalty when it comes to like the tools they use, and then they like refuse to budge after they've learned it. Even though ironically, part of the reason you learned a new tool at one point, it's okay to relearn again. Anyways, that's a whole talk in and of itself. But so what I was saying here is that then instead of putting Percussion CMS, once you've gotten a sense of the Drupal or whatever you're excited for, that you'd actually be excited to have a job to work in, to get experience with, that's what you put on your resume. Because I can't say this enough, in that your resume, in my opinion, is telling people what you have not necessarily mastery in. And I think that's what's unfortunate about the way a lot of people perceive resumes is that, oh, I need to be a master at something in order to put it on. No, it just means that you have exposure to those concepts and that you're basically willing to spend the time to learn more and work more with it. And I think if people approach resumes from that way, I think we'd have a much more interesting set of candidates. Whereas I know that there are a lot of imposter syndromes. And again, this is related to the growth fixed mindset thing we were talking about earlier. Like, that's what people have problems with too. So when you have a fixed mindset of like, oh, well, I don't know enough and I'll never know enough, then you won't grow in this regard. And so anyways, so that's like my little tidbit. If you're looking for the new position, like, again, I'm not telling you to lie. I'm not telling you to like just put whatever you want to work on your resume, right? Because in the example I gave, remember the key context here is that I had experience with the CMS before. I just want to work with a different CMS. And so I'm going to spend the time to build it on the side. I'm going to like hustle on it because yes, it costs more to me up front, right? Because you might say, well, Ben, that's a privileged position thing to say. It's like not everyone has the free time to work on like learning. Let's just say again, you wanted to learn sanity. That's like the CMS you want to learn, right? Like I have other responsibilities outside of work. Well, this is why in my talk, I talk about the fact that it's important then to take time back for yourself. Because if you think about it another way, your company pays you to do training and stuff to learn. So Google was one of the first, like if you want to talk about examples and precedents, Google had the whole thing where, and they might still have it, where 20% of your time is supposed to be spent on researching things that whatever you want. Because again, they believed, and I think they found it, there's actually probably empirical evidence for this, it generally pays dividends back to the company when people can work and learn about the things that make them tick. So rather than like if you have a task that, anyways, I'm sorry to diverge here, but hopefully that helps people in their sort of career transition. So that said, Lirzad here, that's something, yep, I love working with Vue, but I need to focus my resume towards what I love to do and what I want to explore. Yeah, so for example, with the front end stuff, right? I know that Vue jobs are becoming more popular, but you know, for example, like it's okay that like you also put React on there because React has, I think, a larger, particularly with the US market, there's like more jobs with React, right? That's totally fine. I think that's the kind of thing that's okay. But it's like, if you knew Backbone, like I would just take Backbone off because I mean, unless you really want to support it, then that's up to you. So anyhow, Jacob here, I think this completely maps to writing and content you might put out. Yeah, honestly, as you can see, this kind of stuff is near and dear to me. And I think it's one of those things that I would love to see more people sort of examine in themselves, because I can't say this enough. I think everyone here in the chat and everyone in the, like, we all have unique perspectives that if we brought out and we connected those dots that make us the individuals that we are, I think we'd have a really rich tapestry of not only culture, but community. But unfortunately, due to the way I think a lot of us, the way society is structured and stuff, it doesn't always feel safe to do so. So the more I can help to cultivate and inspire that, I think that really matters. So, okay, let's jump now back on over to the screen. All right. What we're going to do now is we've checked to make sure that Readwise is synced. So we've looked at the different settings. And so what we want to do now here is check to make sure, see if mindset was actually brought up. It's in here. Oh, shoot. There are 4 of them. Oh, that's not good. Okay, we're going to figure out why. So let's look at that. Dude man here. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, let's figure out what the heck is going on, because this is bad. Not good. Why are there 4 mindset books? Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I think we have a good candidate for which will be the final one, but woo, this is bad. Oh, interesting. Okay. So at one point I wrote mindset book, Kindle. Where was this referred to? See, if you want to talk about, okay, people were asking me how the heck does the graph and backlinks work? This is where I use the graph, honestly. So for example, again, oh wait, what? Okay, local graph. Local graph at one point, so mindset was connected to Kindle, so it means that I created it arbitrarily at one point. Weird. Okay, don't need it, purging it. Next, mindset 2, local graph. Let's go. Yeah, once again, arbitrarily created, no idea what context it was. Don't need it anymore, purging it. Okay, this too is interesting to me. Why did this come up? So local graph. Okay, interesting. So funny enough, and this is where link thinking is actually really beautiful here, is that I told you that the reason I learned about mindset is because Jade recommended it to me. And well, apparently I also encountered it in the past as well in Drive by Daniel Pink. And so if I take a look at where that was mentioned here, it said it was Origin Drive Daniel Pink. So for whatever reason, so this is where, again, getting better note taking is important, because there must have been something in Drive that mentioned this, that like I was like, oh, I should take a note for this so that I could read it in the future. Clearly my process isn't totally working as expected, but since I'm here anyways, I'm gonna replace the front matter so that it's cleaner. All right, there we go. Okay, so it's fine. Clearly this is the one that we need to keep. Luckily there's no it's not complicated to diff this one, basically to figure out what's the difference. This has most of the stuff. The only thing that I would want to do probably is add some additional back matter. So let's see, metadata, and then relate it. So let's see, this origin, honestly, I'm going to put Jade as the origin. She's really the reason I started reading it, but mentioned in, I do want to keep that relationship, because clearly I'd made a point to tag it at one point. So kind of need to have that historical context. But other than that, to be honest, yep, I'm dropping this note. Okay, this is cool. So now my brain feels more comfortable because I now know mindset exists in here. And it's neat because, it's clearly syncing all of my quotes that I've highlighted. And gosh, I will say my mini rant on highlighting is because school had taught me for so long I should only highlight what's important. And gosh, the number of times I highlighted only one sentence in the past, and then when I went to refer to it later, I was like, I remember this was important, but I don't know why. Gosh, I'm angry at school for conditioning me to being afraid to highlight too much. And now I think I've finally broken myself of it, but I would just, and when I'm in my Kindle, I will highlight entire passages. Because if we think of it this way, right? Think if, for example, this line right here. They thought they were learning. I, on the other hand, thought human qualities were carved in stone. I think that's a beautiful metaphor. But if I just highlighted this one line, I'd have been like, I think I know what they were talking about, but I don't remember. And so basically I highlight the whole paragraph because it gives me context into that there's more context of why this was meaningful, right? You're smart and you weren't. Failure meant you weren't, right? It was that simple. If you could arrange successes and avoid failures at all costs, you could stay smart. Struggles, mistakes, perseverances were just not part of this picture. In fact, even this is I'm trying to remember. Maybe I needed to highlight more. So this is where, for example, if I'm actually, you know what? This one is not initially clear to me. So if I were to create a new note, here's one that I think is fast. So okay. So the processing clear I clearly need to do, but let me refactor this note. This one I'm excited by, because I don't know if y'all knew this, but I didn't. Refactor content only. Refactor by first line as note name. Oh, it doesn't like it because I don't have a line name. Benet IQ test. I'm just going to call it that for now. And let's refactor. Refactor this. Perfect. Okay. Check this out. So the IQ test that Benet, we're all very familiar with, apparently it was not designed to summarize unchangeable intelligence, because I think man, maybe I'm making a wrong assumption here. I think a lot of us treat IQ like this fixed number, kind of like our height, which that is a little bit more unchangeable. Weight, on the other hand, that's the whole topic in and of itself. But apparently IQ was not designed as a test to just measure how smart someone was. In fact, I'm going to just read this because I think this was amazing. Benet, a Frenchman working in Paris in the early 20th century, designed this test to identify children who were not profiting from the Paris public schools so that new educational programs could be designed them to get them back on track. I'm going to pause for a moment on this because this means that IQ, contrary to our perception of it as a fixed attribute on an individual, was actually designed with growth mindset in mind from the very beginning. That's the whole origin of it, because it was we know that certain kids are having trouble in the system. Let's find ways to identify them so that we can then supplement them so we can help them grow to catch up to everyone else. And this to me was such a mind-blowing moment, because all of a sudden this thing that we use to judge not only ourselves but by others, right? Like, oh, they have a really high IQ to like basically explain everything about their personality, apparently. That somehow we've got like, in fact, it's sad that we've gone so far from a test designed for compassion and growth and turned it into something that was basically almost like an elite status. And this is one of the reasons why I think the book started sticking out to me. And this is very early on in the book that this was talked about. So I apologize. Maybe I should have said spoilers alert. But this here, Binet IQ test. So actually, let's continue processing the note, right? Because there's a couple of things here that you might have noticed or you might not notice, is that when you refactor the note, one of the things I do inside the template is I actually link the original note it was related to. And this is amazing. Why? Because, well, it means that when I'm looking at this note, it tells me what it was related to. In this case, Mindset by Carol S. Dweck. And I hear the sirens again. Hang on. Okay, I think we're better now. I see Cassie here in the chat. Ben has so many brains. You know, honestly, it's more fragmentation than so many brains. So Cassie, I saw transparent post-its the other day and they were the coolest. You can write and highlight a book without marking it up. What? This is clearly something I need to buy. So Cassie, let's chat later. I want to learn more about these transparent post-it notes. Okay. So here, Mindset by Carol S. Dweck. This is great. And so as I'm processing this, and more importantly, like I know I'm probably going to want to refer to this at some point. This is an evergreen note. That's fine. Actually, I have a whole thing. I need to look more into evergreen and define a whole schema on that. But anyways, Binet IQ test, I think, is probably good enough. I'm going to say factoid, or no, IQ test trivia. Oh, you know what? Binet IQ test origin. I think that's what my brain is going to probably look to. And then more importantly, actually, I'm going to take this time to actually look up Binet. I believe his name was Alfred Binet. I'm correct. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and tag created by Alfred Binet. And that way, in the future, when I'm reading other books regarding productivity, growth, education, intelligence, there's a very good chance Alfred Binet is going to get brought up again. So you know what I'm actually going to do? I'm just going to create that person note right now, and I'm just actually going to let him be referred to as Binet. That way, in the future, it becomes more likely I would encounter Binet serendipitously. So otherwise, I'm just going to turn this into a page title so that when I basically alter this, the heading one actually updates accordingly. So that's a little trick that someone mentioned in a YouTube comment actually. So really thank you for that, Jacob here. So you have a quad core. Nice. I guess so. I guess that's one way to look at it. I have a bleaker view on that. But anyhow, okay, so luckily it looks like my book processing workflow is not as bad as I thought it was. Some things need to be changed a little bit though, because it's clear to me at least that when the book is created, I'm a little concerned that when it's updating, what it's going to do, because I have all this metadata back here. I wonder if it's just going to drop it in front of it. I think we looked into it. I think it will. It just automatically appends to the bottom, which is not the worst thing in the world because I ideally should be processing this. But the question here is that when I'm looking at the metadata, you know what? Maybe that's why they put all the metadata at the top actually. So maybe books, I will make a custom, maybe I'll make an exception for books, because the automation for having things automatically append to the bottom is a little bit more important than having my metadata be put at the bottom, which again, it's a little cleaner, but for something like a book, I'm actually pretty good with this. So Carol S. Dweck, great. Love that we did that. Full title, mindset. And then type books. Did I type? Oh, I need to figure out whether it's type. I think it's type book. And then I need to have a status on it. So like in progress. And that way, for my book dashboard, it'd be easier to see what exactly is being read and what needs to be processed. So yeah, okay. This is good. The only thing now here is that, I guess let's look at where the template's being generated, because I'm a little curious how it's being modified. Oh, right. Okay, so the template is unfortunately not a standard template that you can basically customize inside of Obsidian. It's something that you're going to have to do inside of here. So you can see here already that we already have a couple of things. So I know that the title is going to be like this. So I'm actually going to prefix that. I cannot automatically include front matter, so that's unfortunate. The book cover will automatically be appended. I like that. Metadata here tells us a couple of things. So we can see if there's a, okay. So couple things here I actually do want to change is I believe I want to always, like if it's syncing, then most likely it is something that it's going to be status in progress. And then, oh wait, TP include attribute type books. Hey, actually, it can interpret templater things. That's pretty neat. The only problem is though that this part, page title, doesn't have like front matter piece to it. So there's nothing, at least at the moment, I can do regarding that, but that's fine. Okay, I'll leave the category alone for now. Maybe I will call it type books. Highlight header, if how else highlights, great. Highlight location, I'm fine with that. YAML front matter. Oh, here we go. Oh, this is good. So this means that I could take my front matter snippet. So if I go to my book page template and I take this piece right here, this means that all this will get put in, and then sync notification, that's fine. Okay, cool. Oh, see, here we go. Type include front matter template. I mean, it's going to be a little bit duplicate because you can see it's automatically appending the triple dash, but that is a small problem to have. So, all right. Excellent. We are good to go. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and swap on over to the camera. Well, what a session we've had today. I know we've gone on a lot of different tangents. We started with Obsidian things, talked a lot about growth mindset, and as well as just things regarding life philosophy things. And honestly, that's part of the reasons I've changed the Obsidian Office Hours series names to Productivity Power Hour, is because I think it's important for us to be able to talk about these things and expand on concepts beyond Obsidian. And clearly, I love Obsidian and we will certainly be talking about it a lot, but this just gives us a wider platform to just talk about different things. So in this session, again, just to recap, we've covered some different questions regarding how to manage workflow of like multiple learning notes, personalizing notes so that you can better tailor your search engine, because that's ultimately what your notes are. And then we took a quick look to make sure if Templar was moving files correctly. It looks like we're good to go. If anyone has any issues or noticing that, make sure to update to the latest. And then if you're still running into issues, I'm happy to see if I could replicate that issue and help debug from there. And then, of course, then we went on a little bit of a tangent to talk about different things regarding growth, fixed mindset, and a great chat interaction in the chat regarding this. So honestly, maybe we'll take more time to do more sort of life philosophy discussion things over time. So I'm glad that resonated with people in the chat. And then finally, we took a quick review over how I'm processing the book workflow. At a high level, basically, I'm using Readwise to sync a lot of things I'm reading digitally, and then making sure that it syncs in a way that's useful so that when I'm in Obsidian, it makes it easier for me to refactor things and then sort of pull those things out. So with that said, a big thanks to everyone for hanging out in the chat today. It's been an absolute blast. As always, if you have any questions about the things that we talked about or feedback, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can drop a comment below the video. And then as always, all the resources will be included in the show notes. So thanks everyone for hanging out. It's been an absolute blast. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And until then, I guess I will talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.